Hi everyone, welcome back to another Steven Drones On video. Today it is my day off and I'm out by Okabena Lake here in Worthington, Minnesota, which is probably no one really knows where that is because it's a pretty small place, but it is right on top of Iowa and a little bit to the right or to the east of North Dakota, maybe South Dakota, I'm not really sure, but basically we'll say the heart of the Midwest, by this nice lake here on my day off. It's too windy to fly today. You might be wondering, it's not raining or anything, but maybe you can see some of the trees shaking in the water, but it's too windy to fly. So I've kind of had some time to think about my last video, what I talked about regarding the DJI tariff situation and just sort of the ongoing debate surrounding DJI drones versus American-made drones, how the market is going to shape up with the new external pressure, we'll say, that the Trump administration is applying on Chinese goods in general. So, and that already on top of the pressure that's being put on Chinese drones by the federal government over the last 5 years, we'll say. So I made a video outlining what I think are kind of the two polar camps in this debate. The very pro DJI side saying, listen, we've got to use these products, they're the best, there isn't any national security risk to them that hasn't been proven. Now, and that's sort of like this drone advocacy organization. I think the Drone Advocacy Alliance, people say they're sort of basically a Chinese lobbying body. Whether that's been proven or not, I don't really know. And then you have the other side, which is the Skydio, Brink, hardcore lobbying of the US government side, where they're essentially saying, yeah, we can't be using any DJI products. We need to make this legislation that prohibits that. We need to have this very exclusive blue UAS list, which is going to say that only these drones can be used by the federal government, by the military, by the Department of the Interior, so on and so forth. Any federal, the FBI, for instance. So you even look at some of the instances with like the Secret Service not being able to employ readily available drones in certain situations, that may or may not have made a big difference in how those situations turned out. May see where my mind's going with that. But anyways, those are kind of the two camps that I outlined in that first video. I don't know if I did in the most coherent way. I'm not really, with these videos, my intent isn't to have it be super scripted. I just want to share what's kind of on the top of my head as I'm following all the drone related news and seeing how these things are sort of shaking out, seeing other people's posts. So that's kind of where I wanted to start this video, and where I want to end this video is with a clear definition of what I see the middle ground as in the UAS space. So I do think there are a lot of people who are in that middle ground, and I want to share some of the posts I've seen over the last week since I posted my video. I might try to pop some of them on the screen. I don't have a lot of resources right now for editing, and I'm busy with working, so I'll see how complicated that is, and if it takes more than a little bit for me to do, I'm probably not going to do it, but I'll shout out the people who have made these posts and talk a little bit about what they were. So the first one is by Chris Fink, who is the owner of Unmanned Vehicle Technologies, or UVT, and they're pretty focused on public safety, essentially doing police drones and setting up remote operations for police departments. However, they're very heavy on using DJI docks. So a lot of their business is essentially setting up DJI docks for police departments. And a lot of their executives have some law enforcement background, but they're essentially using DJI for public safety is what I would say the bulk of their business is. And so the post that I saw from this guy, Chris Fink, which I thought was a pretty crazy post, was that the Syracuse Police Department, so Syracuse, New York, spent, I believe, $619,000 on 5 Skydio drones, which is just insane. I mean, right, we're talking over $100,000 for the drone. I'm assuming that came with the dock. I hope it does. And whatever their software package is. Skydio is very confidential when it comes to their pricing. You can't really just like get Skydio pricing very easily. You have to, I think, be a very qualified lead for them, which they don't really have an interest in advertising to the general public. I mean, they are interested in advertising to well-funded police departments at the lower end and the U.S. government at the higher end, and that fits right in with their lobbying efforts. So that was a very surprising article. I think the original article was from like Drone XL or whatever. But yeah, I kind of wanted to draw attention to that. That really, I think, highlights the pro DJI side, or the people who are saying very strongly, listen, this technology is just not scalable for most of the end user customers that are currently using it domestically. And by that I mean not in a like, if you don't have the underwriting of the US federal government for crazy grants, or I mean, it's just insane. $619,000 for 5 drones. Imagine where all that other, I mean, you could have gotten those 5 drones, right? 5 DJI jocks would be certainly less than $200,000, probably less than $150,000, and are arguably way more useful. And that's just how it is. Probably way more reliable. Gonna require way less technical support. It's just that, I think, we've all kind of known that to be the case, but to see that number, that was very shocking to me. The next article or post I want to talk about is from this guy James Acuna. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. So he's a feisty cat. He gets into some pretty heated LinkedIn comment sections with people. So apparently this guy's like a former CIA dude who works out of Estonia doing defense consulting or whatever that is, intelligence consulting, or industrial espionage consulting. It's hard to say exactly from his profile, which makes sense, but he made some posts. Basically, he reposted a Shield AI post where they depicted their employees working with Ukrainian special forces, and it kind of had the Ukrainian dudes' faces blurred out, and it was saying, oh, we just got back from some great field testing with the Ukrainian special forces, they love our product, etc., etc. And this James Acuna guy was like, oh, you should publish your finding, you should make a public study or have some type of public information that you're releasing, other than just, oh, we went there with 2 drones and it was great. So, and to give you an idea, the Shield AI drones are, bigger, fixed wing, essentially kamikaze drones. Okay. So, and for sure they have a way bigger payload than the FPV drones that we're seeing the Ukrainian forces use, but also, there were 2 of these drones, right? There weren't 200 of them stacked in a room that you see on these Ukrainian Telegram pages or Russian Telegram pages, and where you literally see 1,000 kamikaze FPV drones stacked on top of each other. And it's just a difference in scale there. So essentially what this James Acuna guy was getting at reposting this and saying there needs to be credible field testing publicized by these companies before anyone is going to believe these American manufacturers are actually making a difference for Ukraine. I mean, and I would say the caveat to that, or the maybe what James didn't express in some of his, quick-tempered posting, or however you want to call it, is what the Ukrainians are showing on their own channels, or in their videos that they released. I mean, and it's insane. You can just watch this stuff on YouTube, on Telegram, see exactly what their tactics are, exactly what I mean, if you know what the equipment looks like, you can know exactly, okay, that's that type of motor, that's that type of drone, that's that type of, it's not a mystery. And also, like, they're, these manuals are getting leaked where they're essentially, right, the manuals that they're showing to people of how to build these FPV drones, of what equipment to source and where to get the FPV parts. And I mean, all of this stuff is, a lot of it, not all of it, obviously the explosives part isn't, but, and some of the electronic warfare stuff is a little bit more military oriented, but a ton of it is hobbyist components. So you can see on these channels that all the stuff they're using is either, right, a DJI product that's being repurposed with like a 3D printed grenade dropper or whatever, a DJI drone that's being used in coordination with a hobbyist FPV drone that's essentially built with entirely Chinese, or sort of now Ukrainian parts, because they're starting to build some of it on their own. But I mean, what this guy James is suggesting when he does this, shit posting of these American drone manufacturers like Skydio and Shield AI, is that their proof isn't proof. It's them taking one picture and not revealing anything about how your drones are being used in the field isn't proof. It's it's essentially PR, it's propaganda, whatever. It's not the same as what these videos are showing from the front lines, which is showing what's being used, which is hobbyist drones, custom built FPV drones, which are using mostly Chinese parts, and DJI drones that are being repurposed with, extra battery holders and grenade droppers and all these things to make them functional for military purposes or whatever. This is all to say that there is this heavy sentiment of, okay, there is nothing being built in the US that can be done at the scale and price and just simple effectiveness of what the modern battlefield requires, as demonstrated in Ukraine. And that's just the military side of it. So I kind of talked about the police side of it, where, okay, $619,000 for 5 drones, that's nuts. And then that was more of the military side of it. And obviously this all is part of one sort of drone market, right? The drone market is interesting because it touches on all these different industries, from public safety and military, and then the infrastructure side, the agriculture side, all of that. And all these dynamics of China versus the US and the different industrial bases, it touches all these different industries insofar as the drone industry is becoming integral into all these different industries. So, okay, those were kind of the two anti-US drone posts I saw. I'll talk about one more. This video is already longer than I want it to be, but whatever. It's that's why I called it Steven Drones On, I suppose. So, The other one I saw that was very interesting was from a Skydio employee, where it was just like he was wearing like an American Golf shirt, and it was just this like rah rah USA, rebuild the industrial base type of post. And he got some flack for it from some of the usual suspects, who are more, I would say, where I sit in this middle ground, or very skeptical of the large drone manufacturers in the US and their lobbying efforts and all that. But it was just like this very funny post of him being just sort of blasé, and it was exactly what you would expect him to say, and just not addressing any of the actual concerns, but just being like, go Team USA. And it was just funny. But anyways, I'm gonna move on from that now. So what is the middle ground in this debate? And this is really, maybe I should even cut this into 2 videos. We'll see what I decide to do. But what is the middle ground in this UAS debate, China versus US? I think where the middle ground is one, it's a pretty pessimistic position, because it essentially realizes that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So the rock is, yeah, we can't use China. Like, if we get into a war with China, if there's like a conflict in Taiwan, or even what's going on in Africa, any of these hotspots throughout the Asia Pacific, throughout Africa, throughout South America, and even China's relation to Mexico and potential actions against cartels, ostensibly there being a proxy relationship between the cartels and Mexico, or sorry, the cartels in Mexico and the Chinese underworld, so to speak, which is loosely tied to the Chinese Communist Party. And again, this is all more or less speculation from a layperson, but so take it with a grain of salt. We can't be using these products in the same way that, let's say, Ukraine is. Like, Ukraine would not have survived this far without these Chinese drones. Straight up. I think, in my, again, lay analysis, but this is me, taking an interest in this, studying experts, and also just being kind of an amateur historian and military scholar, let's say. But there's no way they would have survived this far without these Chinese drones. The ability to have these cheap systems at their disposal, right, and they are literally disposable, has been their saving grace, and it's totally redefined how warfare is being fought. I mean, we hear stories going back to sort of the Battle of Mosul in 2016, 2017, how it changed the dynamic of air superiority by having these drones in play for ISIS. But there's really no way to say it other than on the modern battlefield as it's developed in Ukraine, these systems have been vital. And if they hadn't been as plentiful, if they hadn't been as disposable, where okay, one gets shot down, you have another, like one Mavic. I'm not even just talking about the kamikaze drones right now. I'm talking about just the drones being used at sort of a brigade company level for the commander to say, okay, this is what's going on, and those are Mavics. And when they get shot down, okay, another one goes up, and it's it's $3,000, which compared to what the U.S. is using for ISR, it's a magnitude of 10, it's a magnitude of 100 what these systems are costing. So if we get into any type of conflict, we aren't going to be able to rely on that gap, right? I'm forgetting exactly what the term is that the think tank people would use, but that 100-to-1 ratio of their Overwatch system to ours is untenable. And it's if we have a near peer adversary in a conflict with one, I remember that term, then it's not tenable. So that's the rock, is we can't use those systems that they're developing in a conflict, because they're gonna basically do what they're doing, shut down our ability to source their batteries, this ability to source the drones themselves. Like, they're not going to just let the US military use DJI drones against the Chinese interests. That's not how it's going to work. So obviously that's not an option. And and then there's also, okay, what if there are backdoor security risks that we haven't identified? All that, which I tend to think, although it hasn't been proved, is certainly possible. Or at the very least, they've inserted that into the conversation, where at least there's a fear of that now. Maybe there is no backdoor, but they've convinced enough people that there might be, that it's become an issue. So anyways, okay, that's the rock, is you can't use the Chinese drones because they're security risks. They won't work in a adversarial environment, or any type of actual armed conflict. So we need to have some type of Western American equivalent. Now, the hard place is the companies that have inserted themselves into this role are essentially co-opting the lobbying aspect of the American government, the revolving door nature between major defense contractors, so like the primes, and the US military. So what I mean by that is people having high-ranking positions in the US federal government, in either the State Department or the military or the intelligence services, and then be able to go right into corporations and make a lot more money, and essentially apply their trade from the other side of the aisle. So if you look at Skydio's executive board, it's a lot of former military officers, and I'm not necessarily saying that's bad, but what is bad is, one, charging the US taxpayer an arm and a leg for no reason, getting so caught up in the bureaucracy that we're not really creating the systems that are needed, but the ones that are going to make the most money for the people sort of in the sitting in the chairs where they stand to benefit. And that's a lot of the same of what we've seen over the last 20 years with the global war on terror, sort of war for war's sake. And again, this is starting to veer into what is a little bit of my political opinions or whatever, but that's not a good thing. What maybe RFK Jr. would call, rightly or unrightly, the corporate capture, or what's the term he uses? I don't know, it'll come to me. But basically, like, corporate capture of government. I mean, that's the same case with the defense industry. And I think with drone technology, it sort of seemed like in the early stages that there was maybe a revolution against that, where so much of it was, so much of the innovation was being led by hobbyists and people working out of their own garages, that type of thing, where now to see it sort of get eaten up by the same big green monster, so to speak, of Uncle Sam, is disheartening. And not only disheartening, it's going to have real world costs to our war fighters, if when push comes to shove, and also to the taxpayers who are going to be funding this bill of 600, the taxpayers of Syracuse, New York, who are footing a 600,019 or 619, yes, $619,000 bill for these 5 Skydio drones. I mean, that's just not a good trade-off. So that's kind of the rock and the hard place, right? I think the middle ground is understanding that those are both bad and that we need to let the free market be a free market and create our own industry. But the middle ground is also understanding that there are a lot of obstacles to that. And the reality is because of material costs, but also because of labor costs and just how our economy and our venture capital system is set up, that there are major hurdles to overcome before we have a cost-effective and also a technologically equivalent American drone industry to compete with the DJI products and honestly on the battlefield with the FPV products that are being made by Chinese components. And I could go through, there's obviously American FPV manufacturers now that are, I think one of them got added to the blue UAS list, and JD Vance was doing a promo with them. By the way, I'll mention this because I thought this was insane. Or just one, kind of how drones go, how it goes when you're just working with drones, because that's how it just, there's times where I go to power up my M300 and it doesn't, the controller doesn't sync or whatever, and you've got to reboot it. But apparently when JD Vance was demoing and I should put the name of the company on the screen, but the FPV drone that just got added to the blue UAS list, which again is orders of magnitude more expensive than these FPV drones that the Ukrainians are making by the hundreds of thousands in people's houses and whatever. So, it's really it's not even a competitive FPV drone in that sense, I would say. But so you have the vice president there with like the 1st Marine drone assault team and whatever, and they go to fire this thing up, and they have like tech support people there from the company, and they couldn't get the thing to start. Like, so they have the vice president of the United States there, and they've had all day to, they could have flown I'm sure they did too, I'm sure it was just one of those things, but I thought it was kind of indicative of where we're at in the American drone industry, that you have the frickin' vice president there and can't get the drone to work, so, and it's just been added to the blue UAS list. So I thought that was kind of a crazy anecdote. So I think for my next video, because I didn't really talk that much about the tariffs today, and I know so what I want to talk about next, I've been rambling for 30 minutes now. The first thing I want to talk about is what these obstacles are. I know I mentioned them briefly, but go into, okay, what are the obstacles stopping the American drone industry from competing with the Chinese drone industry, and really delve into that. Again, I think materials, but also just the way the American economy works. Labor costs. What is the price of a software engineer? What is the price of what is the price of just someone to build the drones, a drone technician? Who is that person? And then also, what is the cost of the venture capital? So I want to dig into that, go into some examples of that. And then I want to talk about how I see the tariffs affecting all of this. So in my last 2 videos, I think I've kind of exhaustively set out this landscape. And now what I want to do is say, okay, these tariffs are coming in. Pressure is going to be put to accelerate the U.S. drone manufacturing. How do I see that shaking out? Will it be totally in the favor of Skydio, where sort of the fat cats will say will win, and they'll just get to be paid exorbitant amounts of money by the Trump administration and by the U.S. defense apparatus to produce subpar drones, or will market forces prevail? Will we come up with better solutions? Will we be able to compete, or will we kind of just like, well, I think those are kind of the two main outcomes, which I would say the first outcome also includes just not being able to compete, and whatever consequences that could bring militarily, not just financially for the American taxpayer. But I think that could really have serious military outcomes, where instead of seeing the Taliban sort of stalemate us for 20 years, you see a force like the Taliban or some other sort of ragtag force just, decimate American hard targets in a foreign country. If you think about what the Taliban could have done with FPV drones for the last 20 years, it is it's hard to imagine. So obviously it's basically think what what they were doing in Iraq with IEDs, and obviously Afghanistan too, but just be able to fly them into things at will. So anyways, that's kind of where I want to go in the next video. Okay, what are the obstacles stopping us from competing, and how do the tariffs impact what is to come? So will they create enough pressure for positive movement towards a more competitive American drone industry that's able to create things that are cost effective, that allow for an open marketplace? Or will it be just locked down by some, basically sort of the defense prime, almost, I would say almost quasi-fascist entities, insofar as some of these companies, you cannot tell the difference between the government and the company. And that's what I mean by that. I don't really mean, like, other than that politically or ideology, the ideology of the founders of the companies. A lot of them are probably more left-leaning than right-leaning. Some of these leaders of this company, some of the leaders of these big companies. But by fascist, I mean there is no boundary between the organization and the state, where it's really a state-run industry. So anyways, that's where I want to go with this. Let me know in the comments. I know this is a very long video. I'm gonna see how I want to clip it up and stuff like that, but for now, this is what Steven Drones On is gonna be, is me just droning on a little bit. So again, it was my day off, so I had a little bit more time. I appreciate everyone's attention. I know I hardly ever watch something for 30 minutes, so it's probably unwise posting something like that, but nonetheless, these are my thoughts on these topics. Let me know what you think. Obviously there's tons of stuff to add to this, but there we go. So until next time, thank you.